ladies and gentlemen. It's 4:05, so we are ready to launch this very interestingly looking Joint Research Center and OECD session. So I invite Mr. Andrea Conte to start up the meeting and introduce all the panelists. And all for the audience, have a good time. Andrea.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to introduce the session that we developed together. We at the European Commission Joint Research Center and colleagues at the OECD on the title Novelties in Data, Novelties in Method. What's new, what's next? We have decided to develop what we call it a science for policy session, focus on methodologies, because I think it's important to catch up in a field which is evolving rapidly. And for this reason, we have gathered a panel of very expert colleagues with very different background, experience, methods that have been using throughout their own career. We will focus this session on two major issues. So what we call it the scientific methodological advancement. We want to have a first round of discussion to be informative, especially for the young colleagues that are joining the conference. And then we will focus on the core of the work that some of our institutions are doing. So science for what? Science for policy, policy evaluation, policy support. Now, my name is Andrea Conte. I coordinate a group working on, we call it territorial intelligence at the European Joint Research Center. As I said, I'm very glad to have together with me a very heterogeneous, a highly competent group of panelists. We will go along the lines of the program that you can see published on the conference website. So basically, the first panelist will be Rüdiger Arend, which is the head of the Economic Analysis, Data and Statistics Division at the OECD Center for Entrepreneurship, SMEs, Regions and Cities. Rüdiger has been supervising many projects on regional urban development, including thematic research on productivity and growth in cities and regions. Prior to his work on regional urban policy, he has been working for many years as a senior economist in the OECD Economics Department. Immediately afterwards, it's a pleasure for me to introduce Eva Lashka. I hope I'm pronouncing correctly, yeah? Kind of. Which has spent their own career as a statistician, a long career in the Hungarian Statistical Office, first in charge of agricultural statistics, up to becoming the former deputy president of the Hungarian Statistical Office for the production of economics statistics. As she will share with us her experience on the data producer side, I would like to say. Then I would like to introduce, you already know well, not only because of the panel, of the plenary discussion yesterday, but mostly for his skills on the football pitch, Professor Eduardo Haddad from the University of Sao Paulo, Brazil, full professor at the Department of Economics at the University of Sao Paulo, Brazil, where he also leads the Regional Urban Economics Laboratory called Nereus. Affiliate professor at the Faculty of Governance, Economics and Social Science in Morocco, where he's also fellow of the Policy Center for the New South, right? Last but not least, of course, Professor Katarzyna Kopczewska, yeah? I passed the language test, which is professor at the University of Warsaw at the Faculty of Economic Science in the Department of Data Science, where she also has been deputy dean and senator until now, basically. She is a member of the Scientific Statistical Council of the President of the Central Statistical Office since 2020. She will share with us also her experience more on the also user side. So in that sense, we really like to have this kind of panel. Katarzyna work involves geospatial modeling and development of quantitative methods, spatial statistics, spatial econometrics, spatial machine learning. I would like to spend just 2 minutes to give you a bit of a sense of the scope of the session, and then we will start with the first tour de table. I will also introduce you a way in which we would like to make the session interactive, in a sense. So let me just get on the slides to start first to indicate that we always mention the issue that we need science for policy, which in a post-news world, as many people are defining it in science on the media, needs evidence as much as possible, transparent, non-partisan, reliable, scientific base for designing optimal policies for the well-being of the European and non-European citizens, of course. This is a long-term trajectory in which countries are coming from very different historical experience. There is no uniform culture across EU member states, outside the EU member states, of what we call it the monitoring and evaluation field for policy decisions. At the EU level, we have something that is called the Better Regulation Agenda, which basically serves the purpose of being the playground for sharing common experience on monitoring and evaluation across member states. I always recommend for those of you that are interested in the way in which scientific advice inform policy to have a look to this high-level document, because it provides the regulatory framework for what we call it impact assessment. Therefore, all the analysis that serve the purpose of the different legislation, both in the ex-ante design, but also in the ex-post monitoring and evaluation. This is relevant across many different fields. Impact assessment are done across very thematic areas, including the territorial dimension. In the Better Regulation Toolbox, you see on Tool 33 that there is a clear mentioning of the territorial impacts of the policy. Another important key message I would like to bring is the major element that territorial impacts do not refer only to territorial policies as defined in a restrictive way as regional policies, for instance, at the EU level. Virtually all policies, labor market policies, climate policy, innovation policies, fiscal policy do have territorial impacts. At the Better Regulation Toolbox, the example on the regulatory framework that I indicated to you goes exactly in the direction of indicating how the territorial is not a discipline per se, but is an angle of observation, analysis, and evaluation of virtually all policies that are put forward by policymakers. Our role as a community of regional stakeholders, regional practitioners, analysts, is to provide, to play for anticipation, integration, and evaluation of the impact of policies. What you see here, this circle, is basically what we call it the policy impact assessment cycle, which goes from the preparation of the legislation to the adoption, the implementation, and the application, from ex ante to ex post, but more important, from ex post to ex ante again, in a feeding learning loop that goes from, at the EU level, we call it programming period, from 7 years to 7 years. And now we are at a turning point on the preparation of the post-27 multi-annual financial framework, as we call it at the EU level, on the next budget. I will skip this slide, but basically this was an example of the things we are doing by combining methods. We have modeling for the ex-ante, data science, econometrics for the ex-post. What I would like to indicate to you, especially to the young analysts that have an interest in those topics, we have just released a new web tool, which is called Territorial Economic Data Viewer, when we provide territorial statistical information on EU funding programs for each NUTS2 level region in Europe. So make use of this dashboard, actually provide feedbacks to us. We will be very pleased to have so. Now, as I promised to you, the first round of intervention by colleagues will focus more on the science for science, so the methodological aspects and what from the different angles of all your experience you consider relevant, the key messages to pass to the audience. I also promised to you that we will try to have a participatory session, so I don't know if you are familiar with Slido. If not, this is the chance. Basically, if you go on the slido.com webpage, you don't need to register nothing. You just need to add the number you see there, 9282610, and you can text questions that you would like to do in real time to the audience. I will make sure from here to read the questions and to pass it immediately to colleagues that are on stage. So let's do together this experimentation on interactive session. That's it from my side. So I'm pleased to introduce Rudiger for his talk.
Does this work? Hello? Oh yeah, perfect. Okay, thanks a lot, Andrea. I'll be trying to tell you a bit my view of the world from the side of the OECD, the experience that we're having, and I'll start a bit with the challenges that we're having when we're doing science for policy science for regional policymakers, science for cities in a way. And the first one obviously is data. Data is the plankton of research, as you all know. And if you don't have good data, then there is not very much one can do on the evidence side. Now, there's basically, it was also supposed to be talking about challenges. So there's three challenges that I see in principle, and then also be talking about some challenges in practice. The challenges in principle is basically that data are non-existent, that they're not timely, or they are not granular enough. And I'll give you some examples for all of that. And I remember, it was mentioned I was working at the economics department and more dealing with national data. When I started my career in the OECD for the first 10 years. And then when I changed to the regional side, I was shocked because I had expected that I would have basically all the data that existed at national level that would also be there for, at least at the regional level and ideally also for the cities. And then when I started working there, I realized that, the databases that we're having, the indicators that are available were just a fraction of what is available at the national level. And even though, there has been progress has been made, by statistical institutes, by us in the OECD and also by others, but still basically the amount of data that we're having these days at the subnational level is still a very far cry from what is available at the national level. Now, obviously, there's the new unconventional sources of data that we're having these days, and that allow us to basically go further. And I'll give you some examples for that basically. So I'll just use the example of tourism because I can give an example for all of that. So basically non-existent data. So there is still a certain amount of countries where you don't have tourism data or good tourism data at the regional level. Then also, you often have not timely data. For example, during the COVID crisis, we had data about tourism like a year and a half before the COVID crisis, if any, at the regional level. Obviously, that was not really helpful when people tried to understand what's happening on the tourism side, first during COVID when it crashed, and then afterwards when it recovered. So, basically for policymakers, most of that data was almost useless because it came out so late that for the questions they had, it didn't answer the questions. And then not granular enough. Even when you had tourism data at, let's say, the TL2 level, then, TL2, a lot of TL2 regions are pretty large. You have some big cities, some mid-sized cities, some rural areas, maybe some seaside, maybe some mountains. And then basically, just saying tourism went up by 5% is not getting you very far because you'd like to know whether that was in the, the big city or whether that maybe was on the seaside. So, there really is this need there. Now, the European Commission and especially Eurostat has made quite large progress on the data front. There have been, as probably many of you know, they have been doing a agreement with different of the data platforms, in Booking.com and Airbnb and so on. And so they're now getting data for European countries at a relatively more granular level and also in a much more timely fashion. it's still not as timely and as granular as it could be. There's much more that could be done. In principle, I mean, you could have basically tourism data on an almost instantaneous basis, and you could even have like forward-looking tourism data, because I mean, Korea has it. I'll come to that later. Because I mean, when I mean, you have your booking already like 2 months in advance. I mean, obviously there's stuff that's changing, but by and large, if you had all the data that's in principle available in the private sector, you would have very good foresight on basically how many tourists are going to come to which places in the foreseeable, in the like 2-3 months to come. And then obviously, I mean, there is the challenges I would say in praxis. And that challenge often is, especially the data in the private sector, is to get the data. I mean, we have tried to, at the OECD, to get in business with the booking platforms that the Eurostat has been dealing with. We have not been successful so far. And that's a general problem. I mean, it's not just the OECD; it's also the statistical offices. When I speak with the people there, they often find it difficult to basically get access to the private data. When they manage to get access to the private data, then there's the problem that they not get access to all the private data. So maybe you get an agreement with one of the mobile phone providers, but then you're not sure that actually the sample they're having is actually representative ones. Maybe they're having all the rich people or all the poor people or all the kids or whatever. So you don't know. So basically, ideally you would like to have all of them, but then that may get complicated. And then there's also the problem of sustainability. A lot of the time, the private sector companies, they're very eager to kind of like do something with you as the OECD or as a national office or something like that, because they don't really know what to do with their data. But then once basically you have, developed your project and kind of like showed them what can be done with the data, the incentives to basically continue cooperating with you get increasingly smaller. And so maybe one day they decide that actually, it's been nice to give you the data for free, but maybe they should be charging you a lot of money. And that's especially a problem for statistical offices, because I mean, basically, I mean, one of the objectives of statistical offices is obviously to kind of like to regularly provide the same data that people get used to use. I mean, so that people, when they're using them, they can rely that, if they're building business or whatever on those data, that 2 or 3 years in a row, they're still getting that data. And it's not just a one-off. And then when they want to use it again in 2 years, then basically the data is gone. And you as academics, maybe you're less aware of that, but obviously, I mean, a lot of your work is also based on time series, and to the degree that the data that are available in private sector may only be made available on a sporadic basis. It's also not that sure that there's going to be decent time series quality data that could in principle be done. So there really is a problem there. The problem, I think, the final solution of that problem will need to be that there's going to be regulation, because the private sector, I mean, in the end of the day, they will never really have strong incentives to share the data on a sustainable long-term basis. There may be exceptions, but by and large, they can always try to they always have the temptation to monetize them, and especially when national statistical offices start producing the data and then people get relying on them, then also kind of like they're locking themselves in the situation where then the private sector companies can basically try to extort money, because they are often, by and large, in a situation of a monopoly provider, or at least it's like an oligopoly, so it's very few of them. So I mean, there is this imbalance of power, and I think if we're not having good regulations on that, we're not going to be able to exploit the full potential of that data. I mean, we have not been doing that for the last years. There's a lot more that could have been done if I mean, places like the OECD, but also statistical offices or academia would have had better access to this data. And that's really a shame, because there's a lot of kind of like, common goods that could have been produced that would have been useful in all kind of like circumstances. I see I'm running out of my time. I thought, maybe then I will stop here and then continue later on.
Does it work? Yeah. Okay, a quick flash question to you, Rudiger. They are asking from the audience that the challenge for regional science is the lack of adoption of novel methods like machine learning, artificial intelligence. Is there any quick experience you would like to share with us at the OECD?
Well, I think the real problem is the availability of the data. I mean, obviously, I mean, at the moment, when it comes, for example, to generative AI, there are certain skills that we don't really know that well how to do them, and there's maybe not, not enough people out there, or at least, I mean, they are so rare that basically even places like the OSD cannot afford to hire them. But that typically is something that gets resolved very quickly in the market. I mean, data scientists like a couple of years ago were very rare. I mean, skill level basically, but within years, I mean, that gets solved. I mean, I think the education system is getting, I mean, these days is relatively, at least some parts of the education system are relatively quick to kind of like seize on these opportunities, and so the production of these skills then is coming. But the problem of the availability of the data, that really is a fundamental problem, and that's not going to go away unless there is, I mean, very massive regulation from national governments coming, and also maybe from the EU side.
Thanks, Rudiger. I pass the floor to Eva. Feel free also to respond to the same question that I addressed to Rudiger.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Many thanks for inviting me to this panel. It's a pleasure for me because I'm a statistician. So it's clear even for me that the point of view of a statistician is completely different from the other ones. Therefore, I have compiled a few slides to summarize the most important messages. In the first round of slides, I would like to speak about the history of development challenges. In the second round, I will speak very briefly about the answers and how to manage this situation. I mean that most of the challenges are very close to what you have mentioned before. So, in my understanding, in order to understand today's processes, it's necessary to review the milestones of the data and data flow. It's very important for us. The appearance of data and data flow goes back centuries. In my understanding, the first step was the writing literacy. In practice, it means that recorded writing and literacy recorded the people's thought, reactions. Oh, sorry. Sorry. Yeah, my problem that from this point I can't see the slide and try to follow in this way. Sorry. So, and over the record and storing the data, the writing have had a fundamental impact on all of the human activities, such as the politics, economics, law, but also on all areas of our lives. In my understanding, the second milestone was the book printing. Book printing means that over the recording and storing the data, it was very new in how to access the data by the peoples. Following that, no longer became the privilege of the chosen ones to access the data and new information. Summarizing, I would say that writing solved the recording and storage, as well as the rapid transmission of information and data. Finally, I have to mention the development of electricity and IT technology. It is also a new challenge with advantages, of course, because following that, the data transmission became more and more fast. Sorry, I have to see my paper because I can't see that. So, as the biggest package of data is statistics, let me tell you a few sentences about the development of statistics. I think it's well known that the birth of world statistics can be dated to the middle of the 18th century, but in practice, the roots go back centuries as well. At the beginning, the main goal was to gather information data necessary to fulfill the task of the states. Among the data sources, the population census played the most important role, and just I would mention that the first modern population census was carried out in 1996 in the territory of today's Canada, but the first European population census took place in the next century. I plan to tell you a few sentences about the development of methodology of statistics as well. Again, I would mention just a few very important points. The first sample survey was published in 1895. The macro statistics appeared and spread in the late 18th and early 19th. The interview-based survey, which was a very new step, can be dated to the 1950s. The telephone-based surveys, IT-supported surveys applied in the 1980s. So these are the most important developments, challenges for statisticians. We need to tell a few sentences about the sources of statistics as well. I have defined four groups of data sources. The first one is the group of surveys and censuses. These are tradition. Nowadays, I would say that these are the traditional data sources. It's interesting that nowadays, when we are speaking about the administrative data sources, these are also traditional data sources for us. But we have very new sources as well. These are the digital data sources and the artificial intelligence. Most of the challenges, developments are generated by these two last group of data sources. These are very important for us. What's the reason of this very quick development? According to some estimates, currently 2 books of new information are created every day. And in the coming years, more new information will be created than has been accumulated in the history of the world up to now. The technical development, IT technology, resulted such as a huge amount of data that it's no longer possible to manage and use the data without computers. Following this, the result is the information explosion. This is an advantage, disadvantage, huge challenge for producers and users of statistics as well. Researchers, I wouldn't like to go into the detail, for all of the users and producers. What challenges we are facing. As I have mentioned before, the abundance of data has both advantage and disadvantage as well, and we have risk as well. How we can manage this new situation, this huge amount of data. In practice, very briefly, I would say that it means that the concept definitions of the units will change, the data processing, the methodology have to change. We have to follow the development, and the use and communication, publication of data also will be changed. This is a challenge, but let's speak about the consequences of that. We have to update the related laws, rules, methodological recommendations, the operation of the users, producers as users, organizations, but we have to think about the competencies of data producers and users as well. Summarizing, I would say that it requires a huge paradigm shift. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Eva. I pass the floor to Eduardo.
Okay, thank you, Andrea. Thank you for having me in this debate. Well, we have two parts here, and I play a role in both of them as a data user. First one as a professor in the Department of Economics at the University of São Paulo, more academic role, and also as part of two think tanks that are often accessed by policymakers, multilateral organizations to move from applied theory to practice. So in this first part of my remarks, I'll use my academic hat, and I would like to start with, if you allow me to read a paragraph from one of the Regional Science Association International newsletters that I think it's important to make a point, and talking about the academia, saying that is more and more dominated by data-driven applications. It says here, data availability prone to specific methods has sometimes received more attention than the policy issue. In many instances, the use of the technique surpasses the understanding of the concrete problem under analysis. The problem of form, not of content, of focusing on an idealized subset of methods, or of constructing alternative engines for analyzing concrete problems may hamper broader interdisciplinary debates. I think it's also that's very important for regional science, and I'll give you a few examples that happens to me at the university. Sometimes I always receive students that want to work with me, and they say, with the idea for a research project. And very often we receive students say, oh, hey, professor, I have a very good data set, very detailed data set that I have with firm level data with many characteristics, or I can go to the individuals and get all the information and so on and so forth. And say, okay, what's your research question? Oh, we can find out it later, but the data are very good. So that's something that we're facing in academia. You're putting a lot of effort. You showed us a slide with Romulo and Remo, right? We are putting a lot of efforts in the Remo side in academia so that we can get very sound, sometimes data-driven research questions that will give us very sound, robust impact analysis of a specific problem that the data allow us to respond with the appropriate methods. You have all this. I'm not going to. I'll let Kathy to talk about these advances. But the challenge, even using traditional applied econometrics methods that are for ex-post assessment, they generate what my colleague Carlos Azzoni calls finger metrics. So nowadays we are able, with very good data, very robust methods, to point to specific policy interventions. Say that works very well in that place under that circumstance, or maybe that other policy did not work in that place under that circumstance. And you get a very important issue of the external validation of our results, because we would need a lot of volume and scale of similar studies to get a picture on what may and may not be good for design policies in different regions, in different parts of the world, right? So another problem that comes with that is that usually we get studies that more and more are very specialized in space and in the issue, and you may get very sound and robust outcomes saying, okay, that worked here, a very precise estimate, and people stop there. They're happy that they got a significant outcome for that, for positive impact or for that policy, but we in academia don't tend to put that into perspective, right? We don't go one step further and do some serious cost-benefit analysis of that intervention. Of course, you get some the usual approach is to get some back-of-the-envelope calculations to say, okay, that would cost such and such. But for your first slide was the need for evidence to inform policy. We do get a bunch of very nice studies for that. Sometimes the research, the policy question comes in academia, at least, after you got the data. And they may be very interesting, sophisticated studies, but without being policy relevant, right? And we don't want to go to the next step to be policy prescriptive. We just want our studies to be policy relevant. And the way I see economics community, and a lot of, I looked at some programs for the previous conferences, and you see a lot of that, especially with the younger scholars. So if you look at what is being published by and being presented in the Epinos sessions, for instance, for URSA, we see a lot of these people trying to get the best identification strategy for the data set to make sure they get very robust and precise estimates. But from an academic perspective, they'll get good publications, they'll get a reputation for their careers, but if you want to move to practice, we need something more. And that's, I think, with that, a challenge we face. And in the second round of intervention, I tried to make a point based on my policy experience. So I stop here and pass to Kathy.
Okay, thank you a lot. Being the last speaker is always a challenge because we were not coordinated and I didn't know what they will talk about. Yeah, but I'm happy that maybe I will say something new. So my speech is from the perspective of researcher developing the methodology, especially applied methodology for regional, spatial, and urban studies. I was thinking how to start, and I think that first will be the message to take as a title of the paper. Yeah. In fact, my observation just of the literature and of the papers at the conference and the presentation is that we really need a deep community effort to develop and agree on analytical standard which means acceptance, but also the ability to run it. You may ask, what's an issue? Yeah. In fact, what I observe is kind of dual speed in the development and using the quantitative methods, especially in our field of regional, spatial, and urban studies. Yeah, I think we should right now call it much wider. So what I see is extremely quick, the development of the diverse methods and software. If you are a user and you go to packages, there are hundreds of thousands. So new functions appear every day. But if you go to sessions, majority of sessions are having quite sophisticated theory, and then the analysts say, and then I'm using simple OLS and check the p-value. Come on. We need something more, in fact, to catch up with this methodological part, which is running much more quicker than the empirical part, which I observe in our regional studies. So, in fact, we cannot pretend that those methods don't exist. And they exist, yeah, and that will be in a second. So, in fact, what we should do, yeah, what is this message to take? We should integrate spatial statistics, which we know since long, spatial econometrics, which we also know since quite long, and spatial machine learning. They all exist. And it is not that one or the second. Yeah? We should know all of them just to be able to communicate with other researchers. Yeah? We cannot say, I'm doing only statistics, so I don't understand machine learning, or oppositely, I'm in machine learning, so I don't understand econometrics. No, this is not it. Yeah? This is kind of three pillars of analytics, which I kind of must right now for also to become somehow compatible to other fields of science, like biology, like geography, like geology, like engineering, and so on. So, in fact, what we need, we must have the programming skills, we need the digital skills, and we must talk about those methods not as mathematicians, yeah, who are doing a lot of sigmas, thetas, lemma, and so on, that nobody understands that, yeah, but to talk in simple words about the methods that are useful, that can be used. Why? Yeah, you might ask, oh, why we need it? I'm fine with my OLS. No. If you go into the methodology, in fact, we need a progress together. I mean, with new methods, we may ask new questions. Yeah? They are not available with old methods. We exploited that. But what is even worse, methodologists, yeah, show a lot of pitfalls or mistakes made when we are using the simplest methods. Yeah? The methods are developing because they are not perfect, yeah? Because they have some minor points. Yeah? And we cannot use just the simplest methods which have the problems included and say, I don't care. That's not the way. In fact, we should be ready for the next wave of innovations, yeah? And we must use the potential we have. I would say that we are using really low potential of the knowledge that was developed until now. But still we say, okay, maybe, but I'm not convinced, nobody taught me that, and so on. And what we need really is to validate the old studies and also to replicate the current one. Yeah? As we today talked in the RSAI Council, there will be soon a requirement for top journals to deposit the data, but also the procedures, the codes, just to replicate and to be able to say to check whether the researchers did their job well. So how to do this? Yeah, so what, why, and how? Yeah, we should promote it. I like this panel, so amazing idea to organize that. Yeah, we should have the special issues, so I'm trying as editor to organize the special issues on methods. There were a few sessions on that. We should do the books, we should do the summer school, so I'm happy that our ERSA community is organizing winter summer schools also on methods. We should have the open data and codes, and also having updated teaching programs. And right now, like going to the content of the paper. Yeah? So in fact, what we witnessed is a breakthrough in methods, in science, in regional science. Yeah? So in fact, the quantitative method started something like 140 years ago with OLS. Yeah, OLS is 140 years with us. Yeah? Pearson correlation, 130 years. It's like 5 generations. Yeah? P-value is 124 years. Again, these are 5 generations. If we take a generation of 25 years. Okay, so 5 generations is enough to understand it. Yeah? Then the Moron I. Yeah? So still at some local conferences, people saying, I calculated Moron I. Okay, Moron I is 3 generations, 74 years with us. Spatial econometrics. Yeah? Soon in June we have in Groningen the Spatial Congress because of the 50 years of spatial econometrics. Perling did it in 1974. So still 2 generations. Yeah? Languages, computer languages. R is with us 32 years. It was developed 1992. 1.5 generation. Okay, that's enough time to learn it. But what we observe right now is the GIS breakthrough, the big data breakthrough, ML, so machine learning, and AI, artificial intelligence. We cannot pretend it is not there. Honestly, if I check the website, our abstracts, it was really difficult to find anything about AI and ML. Why? All the conferences are full of that, yeah? But we as a community would say, maybe. So we cannot say it doesn't exist. Yeah? And in fact, yeah, some people are saying machine learning is something new. Yeah? So just to sum it up, machine learning was introduced in 1959, 65 years ago, by the Arthur Samuel. Neural networks, 1943, 81 years ago. K-means, by McQueen, 57 years ago. Decision trees, 38 years ago. Random forest, 29 years ago. XGBoost is a fresh method, it's just 8 years ago. Yeah, we had time, yeah. These are, again, 2-3 generations that the methods are with us, yeah. And we still, yeah, we are not very convinced, yeah. So my postulate, this message to take, we have to integrate them right now in our curriculum, in our toolbox of modern methods, simply to exploit them, yeah. So simply to have the value added. So what are the challenges, in fact? Yeah? Spatial machine learning is coming. I was trying to promote that. I wrote a paper 2 years ago on spatial machine learning as opportunities for regional science. And what we see right now, that we have new data. Yeah? That was the question in the meantime, yeah? If we have new data. Yeah, we have the massive point data, web scrapped data, images. Yeah? That is kind of the biggest source of data. So nightlight, spectral data, rasters, photos. Yeah, these are the pixel data. And the big data. Yeah? When we have the big data, there is an issue of scalability, because not all the old methods are scalable. We cannot apply them to extremely huge data sets. But we have also the new challenges. I mean, we should use less aggregated data. And we cannot aggregate to NUTS2 level, yeah, which is like 200 kilometers that and that site, yeah, and say, okay, we analyze it. Yeah. No, this is not the level we are doing right now. We need the dynamic data like trajectories, but also the speed of updates, yeah, is much quicker. Then we were waiting for updates like every year. Right now, the satellites are coming every day around, yeah, so we can have the fresh data. So that requires also the new methodology, simply to use the online data, so-called online data, which are appearing very, very quickly. And also we have the new questions or new ways of thinking. Those who grew up with econometrics are used to explain. Yeah, so we explain this variable is significant, so then we can say it explains something. But what is much more interesting for the world is predicting. Yeah? And machine learning is built around predicting, not explaining. And we should change somehow our way of thinking, simply to also give that feedback to the world. Yeah? But that requires simply using different toolbox. Because saying about the past is like being a historian. Yeah, but the future tellers will always most wanted ones. Yeah? So we should somehow try to predict the future, also with quantitative methods. Something which we still ignore is heterogeneity in space. Yeah? We have the geographically weighted regression developed by Chris Bransdon, Steve Forteringham, but still, if we run simple OLS, it is not that we include it. Yeah? So that is making a lot of bias in our estimations. It might be problematic. The third problem or question or new way of thinking is non-linearity. There's an issue or question if the world is Gaussian and linear, or it's Paretian, when the Pareto distribution is working. Yeah. Another issue, these are the partial relations. Yeah? If the relationship we observe is always or only in some interval of data, so for low values or for high values, so that is something not well studied. So in fact, in regional science, the core is to capture the interactions of humans over the space. Yeah? These are the flows, these are the similarities in the neighborhood. That's why we need the spatial methods which deal with the problems. But they cannot be limited only to spatial econometrics at best, yeah? And sometimes spatial statistics more and less than that's all. But we really need to integrate our toolbox and simply understand it, so to understand other researchers with those developments, to be ready for catching up the rest of the world, I mean the other disciplines, and also to be ready for new for new developments, for the innovations in our field. Yeah, so this is my postulate. I hope I'm not too much provocative, yeah, but that is the question we can discuss further. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all of you for your very interesting insights. At you, Katarzyna, also for answering one of the questions that we had for the audience. I pass the floor already to you immediately, because Balázs is asking on your OLS provocation whether new methods are great, but shared understanding across disciplines is also important. Thus, OLS and p-value are still attractive. What's the optimal strategy we could think of?
Of course, OLS is a good benchmark as long as data are not heterogeneous. Where is the problem? First thing is the ASA statement. Who is familiar with American Statistical Association statement 2016? One person, my student. Yeah. ASA statement published 40 papers in Nature. Yeah, ASA, so they did 40 papers to explain why p-value is not the perfect measure. Yeah, so they also make kind of communicate for audience to understand it in 6 points. You can easily Google that, saying that p-value cannot be a measure for the policy, for quality of data, quality of model, and so on. Where is the problem? If the data are heterogeneous, the variance of data is increasing. That means that the significance may drop, but not because of no relation, but because of different relations in different places, let's say. Yeah. So if we just go only with OLS, that means that we may say, not this variable is not important, and then the constatation and conclusions and the follows up. Yeah, it is not important for policy and so on. But this is not because of the lacking relation, but heterogeneous relation. Yeah? And we don't include it. Yeah? OLS is linear. If our relation is not linear, usually we can do something as I call torturing the data. Yeah? That means all the transformations, the Box-Cox transformation, logarithmics, deleting outliers, and so on. Yeah? So those data look like the photoshopped data, yeah? And then they behave well, yeah? Because they are needed for normal distribution. If you go to machine learning, that is the toolbox which said goodbye, strong goodbye, to normal distribution and to p-value. It is not used in those methods. Yeah? Why? Because it is much more, I call it democratic. Yeah? You can be ugly, I mean, be outlier, be non-normal distributed, be skewed, yeah, and still it behaves well. Yeah? So still we can get the information. So answering, Balázs, your provocative question, yeah, if we should go with the OLS. Yeah, but it's risky business simply, yeah, because our conclusions might be strongly misleading.
If I may, I would strongly support what you have been saying, because I mean, I'm not in academia as such. I'm in the OECD, so I'm looking a bit on all these things and kind of like, I mean, looking at different fields. And it's true that, I mean, in regional science, I mean, we have very fine work which is using the state of the art and is very sophisticated and everything. But you also have stuff where when I see that, I kind of like think, well, if I show that to my colleagues, I mean, they're going to laugh basically. And that's a bit of a problem. So I mean, there's a certain need for certain parts of the body of work that people really kind of like, I mean, invest a bit more, or their students invest a bit more in certain new techniques, or certain, or even older quantitative techniques, and they wrap up they bring up the game a bit, because I mean that's otherwise, I mean, will be a handicap for the regional science if there's still a certain amount of work that's not up to the standards as they are, for example, generally considered in top economic universities these days. And just kind of like, I mean, just to basically, I mean, strongly support what she's been saying.
Yeah, thanks, Rudiger. It's 5 o'clock. We are finishing the first round, but we have time because there are several interesting questions on chat on new data methods. I will pass the floor to you again, probably, Rudiger, because Vicente is asking about the COVID experience. So COVID demonstrated that governments can compel private companies to generate publicly significant data, commuting trends derived from cell phone usage, for instance. Must we await another pandemic to foster similar collaboration? What actions can we take, a national, a supranational agency can take?
That's a good question. I mean, I personally feel that a lot of countries, a lot of governments are too reluctant to maybe push a bit on that side. One exception is Korea. And in Korea, they are doing fantastic stuff, basically. I mean, if you want to do kind of like urban planning in Korea, I mean, you have all the information, basically, you know, where you know, if you want to be planning for schools, you know where the kids are. If you're planning about shopping centers and things like that, I mean, you know what basically is basically, I mean, what people buy in this area. I mean, you have, I mean, all the private sector data and all the government origin data are basically obviously anonymized and aggregated, but they are merged, and you're just having fantastic possibilities in doing that. On the tourism side, basically, I mean, in Korea you have a website where you basically see how many tourists are going to come over the next, you know, couple of months. Do you see more or less where they're going to go? You see where they're coming from. You basically see kind of like, I mean, what typically they're spending on. You see, you know, how much, you know, I mean, traffic jams you're going to have because of the kind of like tourism flows that are adding on to these things. You kind of like, you can even kind of like fun facts, these fun facts kind of like, you know that people are coming from a certain country, they typically go to that type of restaurants. So that also means you have a lot of, I mean, if you look from a like more commercial potential, you have a lot of, I mean, possibilities to advertise things to different communities where you know that they're particularly interested in that. And so there's a huge untapped potential, and most countries are basically not doing it because they're not getting their act together, getting access to the private data and kind of like when merging them with the administrative data and the other data from the National Statistical Office they're having. This is a huge problem, and this is a huge, I mean, lost opportunity. I mean, Korea is using it, possibly some other countries in Asia may also be doing soon, and I fear that certain European countries will be, I'm from Germany. I think Germany is pretty hopeless on that because, I mean, they are, I mean, totally overdoing it with privacy protection, which is important. I don't want to say anything against privacy protection, but you can also kind of like you know, for preventing progress that can be made and really important public goods being produced, I mean, when you're overdoing it. So that's a very important question, and I don't have the answer, and I don't know.
Somehow again related on the issue of phone data, Balázs is indicating that some phone companies aim to work on urban problems by integrating private data with protected public data on their own servers. Any insights from you on this integration challenge?
Not fully understanding the question.
Balázs, would you like? Go ahead.
Thank you. So we are very much interested in mobile phone data, but that's a private type of data which companies cannot really share. So in some of the projects that aim to understand urban issues, the approach is that we try to bring in public data to the company servers. But of course that's another problem, because public data might be also protected and very sensitive if we look into individual level indicators or tax data on the individual or firm level. So that creates another type of problem. So I wonder if you have any insights, either from the statistical office point of view or from the researcher or OECD point of view on that type of issue.
Thanks. Anyone want?
I mean, there may be situations where this could work, but I don't think that's generally a feature that will be very widely used. I think what is more promising is that private sector basically aggregate data in certain ways that are relevant for certain features that can be used, or anonymized data, so that they can then basically, so that they can basically be used in applications that are produced by government or research institutions and so on and so forth. I also think that, when we think about private sector, kind of like we're typically probably like in our mind thinking about Google and Facebook and these companies having massive capacity and actually doing very sophisticated stuff. But I think a lot of the mobile phone providers at national level, a lot of companies who are having interesting data, they're just not very good in using it. They don't have like 20 scientists in their company working who really understand what they're doing. And so, I think there is this. I don't think that is most of the time. There's strong advantage for the private sector doing that. I think the normal thing is rather that they agree to basically providing a certain amount of data in a certain form, and I would also not, exclude that basically they get compensated for that, basically for the time that their people are, spending doing these aggregations. I don't think that you necessarily need to force them to do that for free, but that should be basically a compensation. If this is to basically produce public goods, it should be a compensation for the time their stuff is spending, and not really a price for selling the data, because it opens the door for a lot of extortion, basically.
Yeah, there is one question on the publishing process. The question is the following: how should publishing process change to open the community to research on regions marginalized so far? Tailored policies require more heterogeneous study focus. It's not really a question, it's a comment, but we take it on board.
I guess it is a question, because I'm representing Poland, which is quite visible. Yeah, I did this just to see, just to show where I'm from. But Poland for long was not an interesting country for many journals. So publications about Poland were not usually accepted. Yeah, who cares what is in Poland? Yeah, so many countries are somehow neglected. And I guess this is the question. Yeah? And something which RSAI did is Regional Science Policy and Practice Journal, which focused on those territories which were not the US, UK, France, Germany, and Italy, and China. So we were publishing a lot, and we are publishing a lot about the territories which are not like a first league, simply to show that the development also happens there, and also that helps understanding their policies, their actions, and so on. So I think that this willingness to listen to those who are not in the top 5 is extremely important for the community to develop. So I would react like that. So that's why I recommend submitting to RSPP, Regional Science Policy and Practice Journal, because that is the place where we do this. Yeah. So it's one of the few journals in the world, I would say.
Thank you.
I'll say something. I plan to speak later about that, but then I'll take less time in the second round. which is strongly related to what you're saying. I mean, there is at the moment relatively few reports produced at a very granular level. I mean, there's some selected, there's some selected areas on which people write because this is particularly interesting, but there's probably 90% of regions at tier 3 level where there's no dedicated reports or anything written because, there's maybe not enough interest, it's too costly, and at the end of the day, there's just too many of them. So, there's just no way you can be producing, thousands of small reports every year. But having said that, with generative AI, that will become possible. When you have relatively, well-organized databases, and then you can kind of have some generative AI running on that, maybe giving you some rules, basically you can be, or you will, at least in not too distant future, we'll be able to produce reports that are kind of readable, and they're kind of picking up stuff in a decent way, so that then the policymakers at the local level, they can basically reach something kind of what happened in my, in my locality over the last 3 years, what are the trends, what is the situation, how do we compare to other localities in our TL2 region, in our country, in the OECD, whatever you want, and whatever questions they are having, basically. And this is kind of going to generate a whole lot of knowledge. Now, this is all not going to be in journals, because this is still kind of it's not the same quality, but still kind of basically having that compared to basically having nothing at the moment, this will be a total step change, and that will give policymakers a much better understanding of where they are and in the situation, and what they then also give them an idea maybe what they can potentially do to kind of change the situation where they are weak, or when they see the weaknesses and things like that.
We have 2 other questions. The first one is the following. Data-driven approaches are used in many corporate settings, designing the tools by reacting to users' behavior. Can this be meaningful for regional science? So we aim at, why not? Exactly.
Depends on the purpose, right?
Yeah. Okay, and then there is...
It's important to understand the underlying mechanisms for if you're in the policy arena, right? Otherwise, predicting for the sake of prediction is... Enterprise may be good, but yeah.
And then we have Joseph asking, basically, there is a lot of economic data produced with Earth observation methods. Are there any experiences in JRC or OECD with such methods and data? I will answer very quickly, mentioning the Copernicus initiative. We have the Joint Research Center in the ISPRA side, the north of Italy. This provides work on satellite images and serve the purpose of very different projects like the Global Human Settlement Layer tool. So those data are already incorporated in those tools are generating already data that are deployed for different purposes, not only for economic research, but also for security issues, prediction analysis. So, no other questions at the moment. So, if you all agree, we have 45 minutes. We move to the second part of the session, where we wanted to focus more on potential use for policy evaluation. So what we have been discussed, how can be effectively deployed for analysis. Slido is still functioning for questions. We have agreed that we revert the order. So Katarzyna will be first.
Okay, thank you. So for me, policy is a tool, I guess for many people, policy is a tool to react for some problems. Yeah, because if there are no problems, we don't have to react. Yeah? That is usually an intervention of public sector to some failures. And the reaction should be quick. Yeah? We cannot wait ages to react for problems. So the data must be quick. We cannot wait 2 years, 3 days for data, and then 1 year for analysis, and then 1 year more for deriving some conclusions. So efficient policy means also efficient data analysis and also efficient data collection. I don't want to go into talking about the data because my colleagues do this perfectly and you are much more much deeper in the topic. But in fact, the quick data are usually, as Rudiger said, from satellite data, and as Andrea said, from satellite data, from pictures, from images, from rasters, and so on. So that requires the new methods. So that's why it is important that we cannot apply OLS to satellite data, the raw data, and take any reasonable conclusions. That's simply impossible. That's why we must all be ready to speed up our computations, also the efficient algorithms, to be able to process big data sets, quick data sets, to go with those answers. But also the policy questions or policy asks the important questions. One question which I'm really afraid right now to talk is the endogeneity question. For whatever conference you go and whatever paper you submit, you might be sure that the reviewer will ask you, did you address the endogeneity question? And for 99% of those who are asking, they don't know how to deal with it. Yeah, they've learned on the other conferences. They are not methodologists. They know just one approach probably. The most common is to put historical instrumental variable. And then if you have kind of label, I did it, historical instrumental, okay, fine. So then it goes. And I would say that this is the question which kills a lot of studies. Because some people simply don't have this historical instrumental variable. In some studies it is not necessary because this problem doesn't exist. Some methods don't require that, like machine learning. And still, when people don't know the mechanism of that and simply asking because it's quite modern to ask about endogeneity, that is stopping a lot of research, in my opinion, as I see the things. So I would say that we as a community must really understand what you are asking about and really consider. Because the endogeneity question, how long it is? 5 years on the market? 7? Nothing more. And the regression is with us 140 years. And before it was not a problem. Yeah? Right now we discovered it is a problem. We learned one or two methods, there are many more, to deal with that. But it is not a solution, yeah? Because it is not always a problem. Yeah? So I would say if you ask the endogeneity question, think twice if it is really a problem. The second issue is the significance question. There are many studies which are testing the papers if the p-value is continuous. And there are many studies that show that p-value around the many studies is not continuous. There is a gap. I mean, there is like 0.04849, there is never 0.5, 0.05, then again some gap, and then the bigger p-value, yeah? Because people are cheating simply, yeah, because they are afraid saying that their p-value is equally 0.05, or they are just correcting that. That's why we are in need for replication of the studies. But as I said, the American Statistical Association statement says, okay, don't kill the data just because the threshold is 0.05. No, don't do this. This is not a way we should go with policy, with research, and so on. So that is something we do in all the papers, I would say, and that is something really dangerous for the conclusions, yeah? Because finally we get the conclusions we want all to get, not the real order. And the questions we are not asking for policy, these are very often those predictions I was talking before. The policy should be based on the predictions, on very good predictions. We are not we are not asking about this partial impact and also this symmetric impact. So very often I see that growth of something causes growth of something else. Yeah? The question is if the decrease of something causes the decrease of something else. And those relations are not symmetric. Yeah? But we have the coefficient beta equals 0.03 and then we go, yeah? Plus or minus. That is not true, yeah? But we still take those conclusions. We don't ask the heterogeneity questions, yeah? So we don't allow people and phenomena behave as they are. Yeah? We want all of them to somehow go into average level. And something which is the most important, I would say that taking the policy decisions based on single research is like making a regressions on 5 observations. Yeah, it's unreliable. We need really reliable conclusions, and that's why we need the reproducible research. And just few journals offer the full data sets and full procedures. You know, in different disciplines, there are like standards. Yeah? They were well described in science, in nature. So biology, genetics, they have their standards of reporting. So they submit even the computer environment to replicate the study. Yeah? And we say, okay, here you have the sample of the data and maybe run the data code in the best way. Yeah? Or even we don't report it. Yeah? It should be reported. Yeah? We need the full reproducibility to validate, to test it in different conditions, on different countries, regions, but also to learn, to show the students, okay, try to replicate that study, you will learn, and then you can make a progress. That's extremely important for science, but also for policy, to make really a strong policy based, evidence-based, not, let's say, guessing-based. Yeah, so, thank you.
Okay, so what are the most important scientific and methodological applications you see for policy evaluation? This is the easiest question I received in a panel. Because, of course, it's those that give us sound, clear, and timely answers to questions raised by policymakers. Right? And I'll give you 2 examples from my experience. First one related to COVID, right? I live in the state of São Paulo. It's 1/3 of Brazilian GDP, 40 million people living there. February 27th, 2020, first case of COVID in Brazil, in São Paulo. Next day, the governor created a health committee with 20 experts, infectologists, medical doctors, etc. And 1 week later, he created a committee of economic advisors. 4 of us, 3 very well-known economists and myself. And the first meeting the next day was the following. The governor came to us, I need to know what's going to happen with the economy, because you're preparing a plan for keeping people at home, and we need to know which sectors are going to be affected and so on. My 3 colleagues at the committee, they say, okay, governor, let's wait a couple of weeks, a couple of months so that we'll have the high frequency data available, and we can use our statistical, econometrical techniques to give you some answers. I said, oh, you're crazy, I need that for tomorrow. And they said, oh, don't worry, governor. We'll prepare some simulation exercise that will give you the right answer, not the right answer, the only answer available that was possible. So I have here my colleague Porci. We made a brainstorm in our group, and we come up with a methodology based on simulation using structure from multi-sectoral, multi-regional models. We published right away a methodological note. We calculated everything for the government, so we would have daily costs of keeping, for different strategies of keeping people from different sectors, different ages at home. So if you use this strategy, that's the potential impacts in those sectors and so on, if you close these sectors and so on. Actually, they use that to prepare their plan. That basically was the only information available. And we started, and we had a very good surprise, because that was we found out that was the only existing methodology that that was available. We're talking about late March, early April. And you start seeing people receiving a lot of messages from people all over, and the people start replicating the methodology in different. So I remember, I think April and May, our methodological note was the most downloadable paper in REPEC for 2 months in a row, And because there's the only thing that would give a timely response. Right or wrong, that was the only thing available, and that you didn't want to wait even for quick data gathering for giving proper research. That was to answer what the governor had to do. And we proposed, and that's there are some issues related to data, because given the sense of urgency, we generated another model to give to use traffic data to follow each region activity level, so that they can see, oh, it's recovering, it's not recovering. And because of the sense of urgency, the government put a whole structure of people from different, we call it secretariats, the departments, to provide the data in time for us to generate that. So we were able to generate 2 days in advance, 2 days later, the prospects for different regions, different sectors in terms of economic activity. And actually, with the tax data, the finance secretary, they would give it 7 days later, and we basically get a perfect match with that active. So something that, because of we had a clear question, we had to give an answer, and we did the best we could with the available information already there, the methods, the intelligentsia that were created through different projects, and we could do that. The second example is related to something I mentioned yesterday, related to the September earthquake in Morocco, right? The earthquake hit in September. Next day, I called my colleagues at the Policy Center for the New South, which is the think tank in Morocco, doing policy assessment, policy advice for Moroccan government, and so that's an opportunity for us to help, because the government's not prepared for looking at the impacts, but most important, they created a recovery plan. We can inform them with our simulation models on how to what's the potential effects of different budget allocations given the prospects for the Moroccan economy. In this situation, we had imperfect data, limited information, and not all the tools that would have in DFID, for instance, in the case of Brazil. But our philosophy was, should we wait until the perfect data are available, or should we try to, given the available resources we have, do the best to inform the government in a way that they can at least have additional information for a rational decision. So that's something that also helped. And again, there was a clear question, and we had to use the best available resource at the moment to give an answer, right? So answering I think that's why I told you it's a easy to answer question, but not necessarily easy to activate. And just to finalize, a quick comment on a previous issue related to a question from the publishing. I think there are two other issues related to that comment question, right? Related to publishing strategies, because there are regions that are not usually treated, right? Something like that. The first one is, I think it's related to something I mentioned in my first comment, related to the external validity. It's not that you're going to use the studies from other regions and okay, that worked here, that's going to work there, right? That's an issue. But the way we do with our models is to treat them as public goods. So whenever we submit a paper, you have all the replication files, codes, data, how we treated the data. We send to the referees, to the editor. I don't know what they do, but we also put them in a website, so that if people want to replicate our results, use our models to adapt their models, they do that. We don't find that, for instance, with Romulo, right? We cannot, some institutional models, and that has to do also with somehow with the issue of private access to data, but also a private access to models, right? Sometimes preclude the development, further development of methods, because we have only, it's very hard, for instance, for a spatial CG model for you to put in a 12-page paper. But if you open the code, open the data, right? As we do with our models, people can at least, the expert in the field can now understand what's behind the model. So that's something that we tend to do. We've been doing that for at least 1 decade, and that we see it's making a difference in other countries, in other regions, so that at least people have the starting point to start thinking about their modeling and policy issues. I think that.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Eva.
Thank you very much. Due to the time limits, I think I will use this slide, but just very shortly. But I would like to add something else as well. So at the end of the first round, I mentioned that the very fast development, huge amount of new data require paradigm shift. But it's very important to tell a few sentences about these challenges. About this slide, I would just say one sentence, which means that the requirements are almost the same for producers and users as well. But it's very important to speak about the consequences. In my understanding, what we need a very new way of thinking. What does it mean? In my understanding, it means that this new way of thinking must be a fact-based thinking, system-based thinking, because without that we are not able to analyze the data. So due to this fact, for example, in the case of the users, researchers must know what's the exact definition, meaning of data, what are the sources of the data, what kind of methodology was used, and so on. So in my understanding, this is very difficult task for the users, more than for the producers. So Andrea, our chair, asked the panelists to present an example as well. But I would like to tell you this is an example on agriculture statistics, because it was my first field of statistics. The Hungarian agriculture can be characterized by 2 types of farms, big farms and very small units. In practice, the small units are households which produce mainly for own consumption, but the total output of them is significant. Due to this fact, the first definition threshold was established in 1972. Since that, we have been used this definition and threshold. But a few years ago, the statisticians have changed the threshold. In practice, it means that statistics gather data information just on the big farms, at the moment, we do not have exact information on the total output of agriculture due to this fact, because we do not have exact information. It's cheaper, and so on, and so on. So it is not possible to compile a kind of long time series on this issue. In my understanding, it's quite problematic, especially in case of economic recession, because we don't know the answer of the households on these economic problems. So this is the reason that the users and producers of data should work together. Today, this morning, in one of the sessions, I have heard an excellent proverb. It's African one. It says that if you would like to go fast, go alone. But if you would like to go better, something like that, you should go together. So in my understanding, this could be one of the messages of our discussion as well, that due to this very new, very significant challenges, we should work together, the whole profession, producers, users together. What I would like to add to that, that this kind of regional forum would be an excellent forum for initiatives. Thanks.
Before I start, I just wanted to say something what's basically adding to what Katarzyna and Eduardo have been said. I mean, but that's not only the problem in the regional science and regional economics, but that's also a problem more generally in the economic sphere, which is basically when you have negative results in your research, and you could pretty much forget about publishing it. And that's problematic on two grounds, because I mean, if you're asking, if you're doing nonsense, I mean, obviously that shouldn't be published. But if you're asking an interesting question, and if you're doing a methodologically kind of like sound work there, then it would be interesting that basically, you know, people actually know what you did, and that you're basically not finding any results there. And very, like in the medical research, I mean, that's something very common. And if people, you know, if a drug doesn't work, then probably people want to know about that. If there's no evidence that the drugs work, let's put it this way. And so, I mean, first, I mean, we are wasting information. And secondly, also, that's the cheating that Katarzyna has been talking about. That gives obviously strong incentives for everybody to kind of like torture the data until they confess at the 5% level. And that is also not very, you know, scientific in a certain way. So, I mean, this obsession with only publishing positive results is a very, very bad thing, basically. I'm not the first one who's saying that, but I mean, it's maybe worth, you know, kind of like, I mean, reminding once in a while that maybe, you know, something should be changing in that. And given that some of you may also be sitting on, you know, boards of journals and things like that. So maybe it's also kind of like, maybe it would also be worth encouraging just people, hey, look, I mean, if you're having a well-written article with negative results, I mean, we are willing to publish it. I mean, that could also get you some interesting stuff, basically. Then basically coming back to what kind of like applications there in the political sphere of new sources of data. And that's actually not new at all. Basically in Korea, for example, already 10 years ago for public transport, you had an app that was not only telling you basically when the bus was supposed to come, but it also told you exactly where it was, kind of like with the GPS, and even told you how full it was. And the surprising thing here is not that Korea did that 10 years ago, but the surprising thing, there's a whole lot of places, at least in Europe, and probably also in other parts of the world, where you don't still have that today, 10 years later. So I mean, it tells you a bit also what lag times there are in applying these things, and it has to a certain degree also to do with the fact that certain data are not available. In this sphere, it's less of an issue, because typically if you're having a public transport company, I mean you're having a lot of the data that you would use for that. So it's a bit of a different problem. Then on I mean, we're at the moment basically having the environmental transition. We have the digital transition. So there's a lot of the unconventional data that can be used for monitoring these transitions. For example, in the OECD, we have been teaming up with UCLA, which is a company which is basically doing this internet speed test. You know, whenever you are, you want to know why is my, you know, how fast is my connection, you know, to the internet. Then you go to one of these apps on the tools and the internet, and then it gives you basically, it tells you how fast it is. And now UCLA they're having a whole series of these tools basically, and whenever you're doing that, then they obviously know there's somebody who's sitting in this place and whose internet speed is XYZ. And so they have pretty good spatial information about internet speeds, and we've been working together with them. We've been able to use their data. And so we have been compiling internet speeds at a very granular level. And then you can obviously use that for policies. For example, you can monitor what is the gap, for example, between the rural and the urban areas. And unsurprisingly, we found that this is pretty huge. But also we found it has been decreasing over the last couple of years. So I mean, there is some action which is actually making the situation in the rural areas relatively better. You have huge difference between countries. Just don't want to be telling too much countries, but using the country I'm coming from, Germany. So Germany is looking pretty poor on these statistics. Now that's also not a huge surprise for anybody who's been traveling in Germany and was trying to get like, connection with their mobile phone and stuff like that. We have very good internet speeds in places like Korea that I've already been mentioning several times today. And so on and so forth. So I mean, you can look it up. We're having information out there on that. And then also we have been finding that because, you know, you get the impression, oh, everything kind of like in the urban areas is fantastic and in the rural areas is awful. No. In the urban areas, it's really good when you're kind of like in the city core. But then when you go out to the banlieue, to the suburbs, it often gets pretty bad as well. So it's not because you are, you know, in the surroundings of a big city that you're having great internet speed. So I mean, that's the kind of things you can be finding out with these monitoring tools. And if you're looking at, you know, Internet of Things, basically, there's a whole lot of applications that you can be using smart meters to monitor and measure how far the digital translation is evolving. Then on we've been talking about the satellite data. I mean, satellite data are especially useful whenever it comes to monitoring the environmental transition. I mean, in addition, obviously you can look at the disasters that Eduardo very convincingly talked about yesterday. You can be looking at land use. You can have, very fine-grained information what's actually happening on a given spot. You could potentially be looking at energy efficiency of houses, for example, so you can see to what degree there's progress happening there. You can also be looking at agricultural crops. I mean, basically, you can have very good information what basically the harvest is going to be, and that's also being used in, stock markets. I mean, they're having algorithms where they, looking at the whole world, and then afterwards, depending on whether, they think the grain is going to be good or bad, they're speculating against or, for certain types of output. And then also, coming back to what you've been saying, Eva, potentially we could be knowing a whole lot about, reactions of consumers to a whole lot of things if we had better access to credit card data and the data in the supermarkets. Those institutions, those companies, they're having a whole lot of data, and if there was better access to this through researchers in academia or international organizations like the OECD, or also, statistical offices. There's a whole lot of things we could be doing. Not least also, together with some other data, we could be producing pretty good proxies for GDP, which for national GDP would be helping in the sense it would be extremely timely, but also for regional GDP. I already mentioned that some days ago. Regional GDP, often comes with a lag of up to 2 years, and we in the OECD, when we're compiling it from countries, it's even later. And by that time, basically, maybe you could have done something. If your region is going downhill, if you learn about that 3 years after it happened, basically, your policy reaction is, if it's based on the data that you waited 3 years for, it's going to be useless. This data is, it's analytically interesting, but basically for the policymakers, this data 3 years after is potentially useless. And there's a whole lot of possibilities out there. And as I mentioned in the beginning, and especially when you're going to the subnational level, all these new sources of information that we're having, they're potentially interesting. and they can help us in a way much more than at the national level, because otherwise, I mean, they're the only game in town. Because I mean, there's a whole lot of stuff where you have like surveys or whatever at the national level, where you have more or less decent and timely data at the national level, but at the subnational level you just don't have anything. And if you're not using this new source of data, this will not change. So that's also why, in the way, maybe this discussion about, I mean, new techniques, new sources of data is particularly important in a conference like here, because really, I think, I mean, regional science, I mean, if it is really the bread and butter and the future of this discipline, and if you're not embracing that, or basically the people or the institutions are not embracing that, I mean, 10 years from now they'll be obsolete. I mean, and also young people who are not investing in these skills, I mean, 10 years from now or 20 years from now, basically, I mean, they can go home. So it really is important that I mean, people push that and people invest in that. Last point I wanted to make is basically on when it comes to databases. I mean, maybe you're not all producing databases, but I mean, the way of kind of like, I mean, databases being accessed by people who are kind of like, you know, highly trained in working with data and then getting the data out and then making some charts, I mean, that's over. I mean, if we're not, we as the OECD, for example, if not in a couple of years, we're having basically generative AI tools where people can go basically to a database and then ask a generative AI, you know, ChatGPT or whatever it will be called by then, you know, whatever the name is, please get me the data for, you know, this region and these indicators and between, you know, 2000 2010, and make me a chart, you know, bar chart or whatever, and then basically, you know, that is gently done, and extract me the data. I mean, if you're not having these tools in 5 years down the road, I mean, you can go home. Nobody's going to use your data.
Thank you very much to all of you. We have roughly 15 minutes, but I don't have questions on Slido. So this is the last call for questions or comments you would like to make also orally. Yeah, we have a mic here. No, we had a very long day apparently. So any question you would like to raise to each other? Or we can call the session probably, right? Yeah, so we meet at 7, so it's quite soon, right? So we need a bit of relax. So thank you very much to all of you. I think it has been very inspiring. Thank you all for joining and being active at the session. See you later.